Good day, Junior Techies, and welcome to this video on cellular respiration, particularly now dealing with question 3 of the worksheet. So we're going to dive right in. We're going to have a look at these worksheet questions. This one dealing with question 3, but there are some other videos dealing with the other questions. So do make sure you get a hold of the worksheet and the worksheet memo. Give those questions a try, and then join me for a detailed explanation on how to analyze and answer these questions to make sure that you are better prepared for the end of the year exams. So let's have a look at question 3 very, very quickly here. There are two parts to this question. So there's a 3.1 and a 3.2, but there are two subsections to question 3.2. But anyway, we'll have a look at those when we get there. Question 3 says to us, in cellular respiration, glucose is broken down in a step-by-step process to release energy as ATP. Okay, so here it's giving us context to my question. We're referring to cellular respiration, the glucose that is broken down through processes, and we have energy released in the form of ATP. So let's see, 3.1. Describe how ATP is used as an energy carrier. Describe how ATP is used as an energy carrier. Now, another way to ask this question would be to explain how ATP is used. But when we look at the difference between describe and explain, and this is where a lot of students make a mistake, is that when the question refers to explain as your action word in the question, there we need to look at the what and the why. So in other words, what is being referred to, and why is this happening the way that it is happening? When we talk about describe, we're only talking about the what. And in this case, it says describe how ATP is used as an energy carrier. So we need to talk about the what of ATP that makes it an energy carrier. So for 3 marks, we're going to do the describe part of this question. Okay. Generally speaking, if a question has explain as the action word, it's generally worth maybe 1 or 2 marks more than the describe. But anyway, let's deal with this question. 3.1, describe how ATP is used as an energy carrier. And if we have a look now, we see that ATP, and through our studies, we know this, okay? We know this, that ATP is an adenosine attached to 3 phosphates. Okay, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So it's an adenine group, so that's that adenosine, and it's attached to 3 phosphates. Now, in ATP, the energy is held between the adenosine and the phosphates. So in order for it to release that energy, ATP is broken down to form a DP, which is a diphosphate molecule, and a free phosphate that has now been broken free. And in this process, energy is released through the breaking of that bond. That's where the energy comes from. So in our description here, we're telling what ATP is and where the energy comes from. And that's how it is an energy carrier. It carries the energy between the adenosine and the phosphates to which it is attached. All right, so there we should get our 3 marks in that explanation. It is about the breaking down of ATP to form ATP and the free phosphate, and the fact that this releases energy. That is where we have our 3 marks. If we look at 3.2, describe the events of glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation. Now, I'm going to sort of do this in a table where I'm going to have A in the first column and B in the second column, because you'll know glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation make up cellular respiration, but now we're just describing the processes. It is the what is happening, not the what and the why it is happening. It's just the what, because we're talking about describe. So let's deal with A. So what is happening in glycolysis? Right, so the first thing is, that is where glucose, through a chemical process, becomes 2 pyruvic acid molecules. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to write down. Glucose is broken down. That's what happens in glycolysis. We're going to form 2 pyruvic acid molecules. Energy is used in this process, but also released. The hydrogen ions that are released in glycolysis are transported to the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And that is going to be for the process of oxidative phosphorylation. But in the context of my question, I don't need to talk about that because it's only referring to glycolysis. Hydrogen ions are produced in glycolysis for what purpose? For the inner membrane, to be taken to that inner membrane for oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, so there I've addressed question A, 3.2a. If I now look at B, remember, it's for 4 marks here, so I can't be vague. I've got to be to the point, and I've got to make sure that I address what the question is asking me. So next is the oxidative phosphorylation. Now, oxidative phosphorylation, we should know, takes place on that inner membrane of the mitochondria, particularly on the folds, which we refer to as the cristae of that inner membrane. Okay, but let's see here. We know that the importance of the inner membrane is the fact that it receives those hydrogen ions from both glycolysis and from the Krebs cycle, because that is the importance of both of those. That's actually more important than the ATPs that are released from glycolysis, because I've only got a net of 2 ATPs through glycolysis. But these highly energized hydrogen ions that move to oxidative phosphorylation from both glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, they are the ones that are going to feed into the production of the greatest net amount of ATP. So they are moved through the membrane, and they're moved across a series of acceptors on the inner membrane, which each releases the energy from the hydrogen and then would produce our ATP molecules. The final acceptor of this hydrogen ion is oxygen, and that's what makes oxygen so important in aerobic respiration. Hydrogens will not move from acceptor to acceptor on the inner membrane. Energy will not be released if oxygen is not present. So we need to make sure that oxygen is there to receive that hydrogen ion once all of that energy has been used to make those ATPs. Right, so let's have a look at the points to remember here. In A, glucose is broken down into what? 2 pyruvic acid molecules. Energy is used and released in this process. There's our third point. Hydrogen ions are released. Great. We need to know that because that is the importance of aerobic respiration. So hydrogen ions are released in glycolysis, which are then transported to the inner membrane or the cristae via the NAD carrier ion. Okay, so there's an important point. Number B, or question B, oxidative phosphorylation. What's important here? Energized hydrogen ions from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, you cannot forget about the Krebs cycle, are transferred through a series of acceptors on the inner membrane or the cristae. You could use those two interchangeably. And energy is released every time the hydrogen ion is passed on that membrane. And that energy is used to produce our ATPs. The final acceptor in oxidative phosphorylation is oxygen, and this is why water is produced. All right, junior tuckies, I hope that in us going through these questions, we've done a nice question analysis, but also a little bit of theory. So maybe you can fall back on a little bit of this theory as well in your studies, so that you better understand the processes of glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, as all of them are super important for your final exam. Thanks again for joining us. Make sure you get the worksheet and worksheet memorandum, practice those questions, and join me for further videos. Thanks again, junior tuckies. Have a great day.